I'd love to start off with asking you a question about the message today. Have you ever known someone that seemed to be a lost cause? I mean, honestly, as you're sharing your testimony today, Chuck and Julie, so many parallels I got to see in the message prepared, and I know that the Lord does that so kindly. Maybe you know of a family member or a friend who kept making the same destructive choices, kept burning bridges and causing so much pain that people began to pull back from them, and in some cases just give up hope. Or maybe there's someone here today and you would say at some point in your life you were what others considered a lost cause. In our passage in Mark 5 this morning, Jesus intentionally steps into the life of a man that everyone else had considered a lost cause because he checked every box of brokenness: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, relational. But Jesus still showed up in this man's life because with Jesus, and this will be our theme today, there is no such thing as a lost cause. And that's good news. If you were with us last Sunday, we finished Mark 4, where at the end of a very long first day with his disciples, Jesus gathered them into a boat and said, we're going to go to the other side. As they crossed the open sea, a violent storm started raging, and Jesus calmed the storm. And we saw last week how that revealed him to be Yahweh, the one who ruled the waves and the wind. When they do land on the other side, which was Gentile territory, a man possessed by many demons ran to meet Jesus. The demons recognized Jesus and they begged him for mercy. He would cast the demons out of the man and into a herd of pigs that would run violently down a slope of into the sea, and they would drown. And when the stunned and frightened townspeople saw this, they asked Jesus to leave. But the man that he had healed begged Jesus to go with him. But Jesus sent him back into the town that had rejected him to tell his story. A story that basically says, with Jesus, there is no such thing as a lost cause. Now, our passage this morning has multiple teaching points, and so there are many ways to go. And as I was praying through this, I even considered breaking this up into multiple messages, but the Spirit of God really clearly came and said, just be faithful to the text. I'll do the teaching. And so here's what I expect today. I expect today at the end of the time together, if we stay faithful to the text, the Lord will bring the lesson that you need to your heart today, because it's kind of going to be a shotgun today, which is not normal for us. I believe it's what the Spirit of God desires. So we're going to start in Mark chapter number 5. We're going to go through the first 20 verses, but we're going to walk through it carefully together, starting in verse number 1. Mark chapter number 5, begin in verse number 1. We read this: they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. We'll pause right there. What really excites me about getting into this passage this morning is I stood in this very spot when I got to visit Israel in 2023. And being there completely changed my perspective of this story that I had read multiple times in the first 40 some years of my life. Maybe you're like me, probably not, but I tend to look at the way things are today and project them into the Bible, even when things are not even close to being the same. For example, every time I would read this story, I would picture this guy living in a cemetery located in some secluded area at the edge of the town where the parents warn the kids, don't ever go that way. If you do, there's a crazy man there. like he was only a nuisance if you went his direction. But I want to show you what this landscape actually looks like. It'll loop through it twice. So you notice how the hill is dotted with hollows. There's little caves all along this hill. And those little hollows in the hill are actually where people who did not have much money would bury the dead. If you were not wealthy, you could not afford a good burial plot. And so they would take the bodies and they would put them into these hollows of these hills. And I'm standing on like a little plateau that looks directly over on all of this. And suddenly my perspective was like, wait, this guy's not on the edge of town. He's like right there. Meaning at any time people could step over and they would watch him be running on this hill amongst all these tombs. And they would be hearing him screaming and wailing. And it's not like he was in a secluded part of town. He was central to everything for those who lived there. And not only would his screams be heard, but as they would see him, one of the other gospels tells us that he ran around naked, cutting himself with stones. You sometimes think like, well, what would cutting yourself with a stone? Like, why would cutting your flesh have anything to do with demon possession? And I would love for you to hear this. Every body here, I don't mean just everybody, I mean every body here was made in the image of God. And if you are a believer, every body is not just made in the image of God, but is the temple of the living God. Which is like, no wonder the forces of Satan would target and attack his body, because our bodies are a reminder to Satan that someone greater than he exists. And we live as imagers of Yahweh. And if we belong to him, we are temples of his very spirit. And while we may not realize this, I would hope to open your eyes to this fact today. Our physical bodies are a battleground for spiritual allegiance. We got to hear just a portion of it from Chuck and Jules' testimony today. Here's one of the questions. Will we use our hands and feet to serve Jesus or to serve self? Will we use our eyes and our ears and our mouths and our bodies? Will we use them to serve the king or to serve his greatest enemy? Our bodies are a battleground for spiritual allegiance. As simple as something as when I walk in the door and see someone I don't know, will I use my eyes to look at them, my mouth to smile at them, my lips to speak to them, or will I just turn away from them so that I feel more comfortable? That's a battle right there. For spiritual allegiance, do we bring the love of Christ to others, or do we hide away in comfort for ourselves? Remember, Paul tells us that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but we do need to realize those spiritual forces we do wrestle against, they're out for our flesh and blood, because we image the very God to which they are enemies of. Let's keep reading in verse number 6. It says, when he, meaning this man filled with the demons, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." I'm going to pause there and ask you this question. Does it surprise you that when Jesus showed up, the demons ran to him instead of away from him? That seems crazy, right? Like, why would they run to him? It's very possible these demons are ready to admit what many of us as Christians are not, and that is, with Jesus, you just can't hide. There's nowhere to run. See, Adam and Eve tried to hide from God after they sinned, and how did that turn out? Which just led me, and I think the Spirit of God's asking this question to someone here today. What are you trying to hide? And when was the last time you were just willing to come clean about everything with Jesus? Because here's the thing, Jesus isn't waiting to discover our brokenness. He knows all about it. He's waiting for us to surrender it so he can do something about it. But so often we think as long as no one else knows, oh, I'm sorry, there's nowhere to hide with Jesus. But I would love for you to think about this. If I were to describe someone running to Jesus, falling on their knees in front of him, and calling him the Son of God, would you think I was describing a disciple or a demon? How interesting is that? The demons run to, fall on their knees, and call Jesus Son of God. In fact, the New Testament book of James tells us the demons believe there is one God and they tremble. Wait. So what we're saying is the Bible tells us the demons run to Jesus, fall on their knees, call him the Son of God, and believe. Isn't that how most people would describe salvation? Going to Jesus, falling on your knees, recognizing him for who he is, and believing. So what's the difference? These demons do not worship Jesus for who he is and give him their allegiance. They said the right words, but they weren't looking to follow him with their lives. How many religious people do the same thing? We say the right words in front of the right people, but then walk our own way. I kind of have tried to balance last week's message with the disciples and learning who Jesus is with this week, because if you think about it, last week, after Jesus calmed the storms, the disciples asked a question: who is this? Jesus arrives this week on the seashore, and the demons run to him, and they don't say, "Who are you?" They already know. They acknowledge him as the Son of God. So these disciples who don't even know who Jesus is, as they continue to follow the way of Jesus and they learn more about him, they eventually turn their lives completely over to him. Where the disciples who have all knowledge of who Jesus is say, "We'll never surrender to you." And I think that's a great lesson. Because I think there's a whole lot of people who grew up in church who think that saying the right words is the answer. But I'm telling you, the right words don't make you a disciple. Living a life of allegiance to King Jesus does. Right? And the more we learn about Jesus, the more we're going to come face to face with whether we will choose to accept who he is as king, or we will reject who he is as king and walk our own way. We will either surrender and serve, or we will recognize and retreat. And those put us on two different sides. Because those with saving faith will follow him. So may I ask you to consider, what did your life look like this week? The right words or the right works? We're not saved by our works, but remember, we are saved to good works. And saving faith will lead to us living out the life Jesus asks us to live. You notice in verse 9 how the demon asked for Jesus' name, or how Jesus asked for the demon's name. Now, if you've been with us for a couple weeks and you remember, it was just a couple weeks ago, Jesus cast a demon out of a mute man. He didn't have to ask the name, he already knew. So in this case, too, Jesus didn't have to ask the name of this demon. He says, "What is your name?" And I just wonder, did he ask as a teaching point for his disciples so he could continue to train them? Because the name given is Legion, for we are many. I'm sure most of you know this, but a legion is a Roman military term. It's for about 6,000 soldiers, which means when this man said we are legion, those disciples are witnessing 6,000 or more demons on their knees in front of the man that called them to follow him. So think of what they're learning about this new rabbi. They're learning more of his identity because the storm revealed him to be Yahweh, and now these demons are confirming it. They're learning more of his power. He stilled the waves, and this legion now bows before him. They're learning more of his love. Yes, he healed the sick Jews that the disciples were okay with him healing. Now he's crossed the sea to go to the unclean Gentiles, and he is offering the same compassion to them. And I just wonder, how many times would the disciples come back to this moment in their lives? When they grew very tired of the ministry to which they were called, they remembered, but wait, we were commissioned by the very Son of God himself. This isn't just a calling that someone gave us. This is a calling of God himself. When they grew fearful of their enemies, they remembered, but a legion of demons bowed to the one who called us, and he promised that he would go with us. When they grew indifferent, almost apathetic to the people that they were caring for or calling to be in their mission, they remembered our rabbi. He crossed an open sea. He stilled the storm to help what everyone saw as a lost cause. And with Jesus, there is no such thing as a lost cause. And I pause to just ask, which of these do you need to be reminded today? Did you show up today weary? So tired? Don't forget who called you, the King of Kings himself. Are you scared? Don't forget who is with you, the Lord of Lords, the God of gods, the one to whom all else bow a knee. Are you feeling a bit apathetic, like I just don't even care anymore? Hey, don't forget who loved you, one who never stops caring, even for the lost cause. Notice what happens next in the passage. This legion, this host of demons, he makes a request of Jesus. Verse 10 it says, and he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside, and the demons begged Jesus, send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them. He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. That first portion is so interesting. Demons begged not to be moved out of this area. Say, what is that? I would argue that this has everything to do with cosmic geography, which we talked about back in Deuteronomy. Like, this was a land of false gods, a place of the unclean. And these demons had found a home in this land of the Gentiles and wanted to stay where they had been accepted, even willing to enter a herd of pigs in order to stay in this area. You say, well, why would they have to enter pigs? Well, think, demons are spiritual beings, so they need physical places to dwell. And what I think is so comical about this is they're like, don't send us into the abyss, which is another word for the sea. So they say, can we go to the pigs? And Jesus gives them permission, and the pigs run into the abyss, the sea. As quickly as they found a new host, they lost it. And here's the thing. They're going to start looking for a new place to dwell, but they would keep searching. And we're not going to get to it for a couple of weeks. But at the end of Mark 6, Jesus comes back to this very location at the end of Mark 6. And what we're going to find is these demons who were cast out of this man and into the pigs and are looking for a new host. They won't find it here. It's so cool because Jesus has a different plan. But the fact that these demons are looking for a host is just a reminder to each of us that we must be daily filling our lives with the Spirit of God. It is not enough to just try to remove sin, right? Sin is always looking for a place to dwell. So our lives can't just be empty of sin. It still leaves room. They've got to simply be full of the Spirit. And if you were here a couple weeks ago, I showed you an illustration of just you taking a water jug and just continuing to fill that dirty cup. Just keep pouring the water in, and eventually the dirt leaves. Can I just encourage you, fill yourself with the Spirit, and the sin will take care of itself. Let's look at the reaction to this miracle. Verse 14. It says, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. Okay, so when the people show up, like what do they notice? This crazy, once naked, howling maniac was sitting quietly, fully clothed, and in his right mind. And what's their reaction? Fear. We have seen a lot of fear in the last 2 weeks. The disciples were afraid of the storm, then they were afraid of Jesus. These demons are afraid of Jesus. Now the townspeople are afraid of this change in this man, this radical change. And I know I sit back with Western eyes and I say, like, how could you not find joy and excitement and celebration? This lost cause of a man has been terrorizing your town. He's suddenly radically different. How do you not celebrate? But they don't. They're very afraid, which leaves me just wondering this question. Had they simply grown used to the chaos the demons had brought into their lives? And they would rather live with the chaos they know than the change that would lead to the unknown. I mean, think about it. The demons asked to stay, and the people asked Jesus to leave. Like, could it be that despite the chaos the demons brought into their town, the people had simply grown used to their presence and were like, we're just living this way now. It's just who we are. It's what we do. And I wonder how many believers struggle with this too. Like, there are many Christians who long for change, but quietly fear what it might cost. I don't want to be like this anymore. But if I fully commit to changing my life and following Jesus, I don't know where that will go. So I'll live in the chaos rather than step out in faith. So I talk with Christians sometimes who are like, Pastor, I'd love to financially support the kingdom, right? But I don't know how it's going to impact my lifestyle. Or there's those who see the needs in the church and they hope others will meet those needs, but there's this fear of what commitment would mean to me. Those who really want to see family and friends reach with the gospel, but they're afraid, and so they remain silent and nothing changes. Right? The attention of these people were on the floating pigs instead of this transformed man. because the community saw that was very costly. That was our resources. That was our economy. And it's floating in the middle of the lake right now. That's not worth it for the change you can bring. So leave. It's so interesting, right? Up until this point in Mark, every time Jesus does a miracle, what's the result? The people who witness the miracle, they go find someone else and say, come. And Jesus does more miracles. Here, these people witness the miracle and they say, we want you out of here. Because the change was costly. Although a lost man had been restored, their concern was lost income. But see, Jesus didn't send their pigs into the water. They're blaming Jesus for it. The demons are the one that took the pigs into the water, but they're the ones that saying, we want Jesus to leave. The demons are like, we'll stay. Okay, I think this is really important. It might be really wise for us to step back and be reminded that when people are upset about something in their life, rationalization goes out the window. Like we just don't think clearly anymore when we're upset. Like, have you ever noticed how quickly people rush to blame God in the midst of negative circumstances, but how slow we are to finally getting around to saying, oh, and this good thing of what God is doing? May I encourage us all? Let's be as quick to thank God for the good as we are to cry out in the hard. Because if we live a life that is pushing Jesus away, we have to understand, just like we're going to read in this story in just a moment, Jesus is so gentle that if you tell him to leave, he will. And this may be a wake-up call for some of us that the God who commands a legion of demonic forces won't fight to control the heart of a single individual. He controls legions of demons, but he's not going to fight you. He'll wait until you're ready to surrender. If you reject that invitation, he's not going to force himself into our lives. So as we read in closing, Jesus got into the boat to leave the people, but he doesn't leave the people alone. Look at verse 18. It says, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So grasp this out of the story. The demons asked Jesus for permission to enter pigs, and it was granted. The people asked Jesus to leave, and he did. This man asked Jesus, can I go with you? And Jesus says no. The only person denied by Jesus in this moment is the one who said, I want to go with you. Like, but wait, like I thought that was the whole point. Wasn't Jesus gathering people to be his disciples? Here, this man who's ready to go with him. Like maybe he wanted to go with Jesus because he was afraid to return to the people he had once terrorized. Maybe he wanted to stay around Jesus because he was afraid of those demons and he knew Jesus had power over them. Maybe Jesus had brought such a change that he couldn't think of life now without him. I don't know. But Jesus, when this man said, can I go with you? Jesus said no. I have a different purpose for you. See, Jesus transformed this man's life so he would have a story to tell. And Jesus is the hero of his story, like he is with ours. He sent this man out into the crowd with no theological training. He never sat on a Torah school to learn. All he had was a simple story. In one encounter with Jesus, this man delivered me from years of uncleanness, torment, and fear. That was his whole story. And Jesus said, go tell it. We're gonna come back in Mark 6, and we're gonna see this story changed an entire community. But no doubt as the disciples got back on the boat and gladly sailed back to their Jewish towns, they've got to be thinking, wait a second. So everything that we have just spent the last 2 weeks going through, the getting on the boat, the going to the other side, the storm, this demon-possessed man, wait, all of this was for Jesus to reach one person, one lost cause? Yeah, that's what he does. Would there be any of you in here that say, yeah, and I'm testimony to the fact that with Jesus, there is no lost cause? Is there anybody like that? Would you raise a hand like, I am the one? Yeah, that's what Jesus does. But here's the cool thing. This man is actually living out the real life story of a parable Jesus is going to tell a little bit later. Tell me if you recognize this parable. A man was living in an unclean life amongst the pigs. And then he was given new clothes, and he was restored to his home, and he would encounter some who doubted the very love that had redeemed him. This man is like a real life prodigal son. And here's the thing. Aren't we all? Haven't we all, if we've been touched by Jesus, found ourselves out of the pig pen, given the righteous robes of Jesus, restored into a family, and yet we'll still encounter people who kind of wonder about our story? So how do we respond? Well, we recognize the rule of Jesus. Like there's no greater force than King Jesus. Legions of demons. One day, every person, every being in heaven and on earth will bow to his name. And yet we often tell him to leave the throne of our heart. Leave so I can keep things the same way. So here's my challenge. This week, start each day with a simple prayer of surrender. Jesus, you are King. Rule over my heart, rule over my words, rule over my life, rule over my hands. You are King. And I acknowledge that today. We also celebrate the compassion of Jesus. I love this. Maybe you believe me, maybe you don't, but I often will stop and ask Jesus when I'm done with the message preparation, what do you want people to know about you? And this is what I really believe the Spirit said. Jesus said, I want the church to know I care about the disciples who follow me. I care about the one who opposes me. I care about the skeptics who doubt me. I care about every single person. Faithful and doubting, hurting and hardened, skeptic and seeker. And I love them so much, I'm sending you with your story to tell them. This past week, I got to meet Peyton and Amanda, or spend some time. Peyton, would you just raise a hand? I'm not going to embarrass you. Just keep it up for just a moment. So people, okay, right back there. So that's Peyton and Amanda. They're back there. They've been attending church. I think this is week number 4 or right around that time. And I've gotten a chance. And I think on the second week, Amanda was in here by herself after the service was over, and Peyton had taken their older son, Lucas, outside to play. And I just asked Amanda a little bit about what brought you to Plymouth Community Church. And she just really briefly shared with me. She said, the story that God has been doing in our life over these last couple years, but also a couple months especially. And I said, I'd love to hear that story. So I got to go to their home this week and spend some time with them. And as they shared their story with me, I'll be honest with you, it's a story of a lot of brokenness. When they got done sharing, Peyton had stepped out, and I said to Amanda, I said, man, that is a beautiful story. And her response to me was, it doesn't really seem that beautiful. Like, right. But what she meant was, like, all the elements that made up this story, like, they're all painful. They just gave birth 12 12 weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks, I was right, 12 weeks ago to a beautiful daughter, Serenity. And Serenity has some physical challenges that they weren't aware of when she was carrying and when she was born even. And yet they have taken this story, their story that God is continuing to write and saying, I don't necessarily see the beauty in it, but oh man, when you sit back and you hear it and you see the redemption story that Jesus is bringing into their home, I was like, wow, this is beauty from ashes. This is what Jesus does. Brokenness to beauty. That's who our King is. And that's why we glory in his gospel. Because here, I'm done, but let me say this. The gospel isn't just a story of Jesus redeeming the outcast. Okay, you got this. If you missed everything else, get this. It's not just a story of Jesus redeeming the outcast. It's a story of Jesus actually becoming the outcast. He became the lost cause. Because think with me, what happened? The townspeople took Jesus to the outside of their town. They cast him out. And they stripped his clothes, and they tore his flesh, and they placed him among the dead. But this is the story of our King, right? It's a story of redemption. He doesn't stay there because with Jesus, there is no such thing as a lost cause. And so the very Son of God became an outcast so that outcasts could become sons of God. That's our King. We are sons and daughters of our Father because the Son said, I'll take their place. I'll be the outcast. Jesus says, so that they can have my place. Boom! So when we stand in just a moment and we close by singing All Hail King Jesus, that's what we're doing. That's what we're saying. All hail the one who gave up everything. He took my place. He took my sin. He took my pain, and he gave me everything that was his. Of course, what else can I say but all hail King Jesus? We love you. So let's do it. Let's stand. Worship team, come on up. And I know I got to give you time to get your headphones on and get all that ready. So I'll just keep talking for a little bit more, right? If you're here today and you feel like a lost cause, you're not. You're not a lost cause. If you're here today and you feel bound and captured, you're not. He offers freedom with Jesus. There is no such thing as a lost cause.